Hello, hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Friday Office Hour. Today, as indicated in the title, we are discussing generational wealth gaps and spending habits, and generally the themes that surround the recent announcement and implementation of the student debt relief action that was carried out by the Biden-Harris administration. So, to start, I want to welcome everyone to this space under the hood where aspiring, current, or retired STEM students and professionals can get together and discuss some of the behind the scenes of higher education, particularly for STEM people. Now, the usual disclaimers are as such. If you have an issue related to Title IX, please take that to an authorized representative on your campus. Also, any views I express here are my own, right? They do not reflect that of any institution that I have been associated with over the past 10 or so years. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Give me just a second here. And just as a note, we are back in school. We are teaching, we are learning, and it's good to be back in the classroom with students. Let's go ahead and remove that. Now, thank you for your patience. I'm going to talk about some of the facts surrounding the student debt relief, and then we'll also go into some of the circumstances around which debt relief is extremely important. So first, we're going to go over the briefing from the White House issued on August 24th, 2022. So let's hop on over to the briefing. Alrighty. This is the fact sheet. So President Biden announced student loan relief for borrowers who need it most. And just to throw in my opinion here, I am really happy to see this take place. I am impartial because I don't benefit from this. So, I mean, I have seen joy on people's faces, people particularly who have either been saddled in student loan debt for a long time, and they've either been in forbearance and, due to not making enough money, and people that are currently still in traineeships, they're in graduate school, and they really haven't settled into their final position. So I think it's a really nice way to stimulate the financial health and of the people that have to borrow for school. All right, a 3-part plan delivers on President Biden's promise to cancel $10,000 of student debt for low to middle income borrowers. Okay. And I'm just going to pick out the stuff that I find interesting. Since 1980, the total cost of both 4-year public and 4-year private college has nearly tripled, even after accounting for inflation. Yeah, it's gone up quite a bit, as has the price of goods and services. Federal support has not kept up. Pell Grants once covered nearly 80% of the cost of 4-year public college degrees for students from working families, but now only cover a third. Okay, so this action by the federal government was pretty necessary, as costs have really exceeded people's incomes by a large margin, even when we're accounting for inflation. According to a Department of Education analysis, the typical undergraduate student with loans now graduates with nearly $25,000 in student debt. And I'm pretty sure they've run the numbers and done the analysis to justify the student debt relief caps that they did. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So this is the graphical display of the cost of attending college versus Pell Grant values. And you can see here in the yellow that the Pell Grant values have pretty much largely stagnated, but the cost of four-year university has gone way up. Okay. So at the time of this briefing, there was about $1.6 trillion in student debt. And of course, this is not interest-free debt. So that number, continues to accumulate when people are when interest rates and interest is being applied to the loan. Right now, we are in an interest-free period because of the economic issues related to C-19. But interest does accrue in usual times. Okay. Nearly 1/3 of borrowers have debt but no degree. And that's really sad, because the promise of going to school means that you'll get a degree that will allow you to be gainfully employed. And so the third of the borrowers with this circumstance have a really losing bet. You're pretty much taking a gamble when you borrow for school that you will have a job at the end of it that will allow you to pay it back. All right. So let's talk about the plan that actually relieved part of the debt for people that had to borrow for college. According to this White House brief, the executive branch is meant to provide targeted debt relief to address financial harms of the pandemic, fulfilling the president's promise. And in that promise, it provides up to $20,000 in debt cancellation to Pell Grant recipients. And the debt cancellation is only applicable for those with Department of Education loans, so federal student loans. So if anyone consolidated loans from the federal government to a private lender, then you're probably not eligible for this. And for people who did not receive Pell Grants, they're eligible for up to $10,000 in debt cancellation. Now, as with most financial incentives in the government, there is an income limit. So those two cancellations only apply, you're only eligible if your total income as an individual, so a person that is single, you filed in your taxes that you are single, and if your individual income is less than $125,000. Now, this may seem like a lot, but as we'll see in a couple slides up, $125,000 with tax rates, inflation, and the cost of housing can get eaten up fairly quickly if you're a single person. Now, if people are married, all right, so if you are a borrower and you are married and you file your income taxes jointly with your spouse, your income cap for your partnership is $250K. I'm going to talk about this in just a second about the single penalty. So no high income individual or households such as the top 5%, will benefit from this action, which is it's right on because people that have high income can afford to pay back their loan. It's pretty straightforward. All right, and so of course we do have the pause on loan repayments. It used to be August 31st. They've extended it until December 31st, 2022. We're resuming in 2023, provided that the economy recovers, right? So that's what is being implemented for people that have already borrowed their for their education. And I know several people personally that benefit from this. And I'm actually pretty happy for them because I feel bad for people that are entering into the workforce in the next 5 years because the dollar doesn't stretch as long, right? Especially if you're moving to a location with high cost of living. And we know that the competitive jobs in STEM fields are in areas where the housing costs are really high. And that's pretty much driven by market-driven behavior with renting and buying a home. Desirable jobs tend to be in tech hubs, okay, Boston, Los Angeles, DC, the Bay Area. And so higher earners are more willing to pay more for housing. And it's a never ending cycle that keeps driving rates up. All right, and the other two parts of this promise are the following. So this is meant to help current and future borrowers. So cutting monthly payments in half for undergrad loans. The Department of Education is proposing a new income-driven repayment plan that protects more low-income borrowers from making any payments and caps monthly payments for undergrad loans at 5% of your discretionary income. And so that's half the rate that you have to pay now, all right? This means that the average annual student loan payment will be lowered by more than $1,000 for both current and future borrowers. I'm no economist, I'm no behavioral sociologist, but $1,000 a month being freed up, I'm sorry, this is the annual. So if you spent, so $1,000 monthly translates to about $83. I'm sorry, y'all. $1,000 annual translates to about $83 monthly. So that's the benefit to this policy. So when your monthly income is $500 after taxes, $83 is a lot. It's 16%. So if you're getting an additional 16% of your income every month, that can actually go a long way to reduce some of the burden of maybe having a low income, right? So every little bit counts. And even though I am not eligible for this policy, I remember when $83 a month went a long way, especially for your food budget every month and maybe for entertainment, but largely this is for food and bills. And then this other thing that they're going to do, they're going to fix the broken public service loan forgiveness program by proposing a rule that borrowers who have worked at a nonprofit, in the military, or in federal, state, tribal, or local government receive appropriate credit toward their loan forgiveness. All right. So they've made good on this, such that 175,000 public servants have already had more than $10 billion in loan forgiveness approved. And so with that loan burden reduced from public servants, perhaps that their credit score improves, and perhaps now they are eligible to rent or buy a home that they previously weren't if their loans were negatively impacting their credit score. In my experience, my student loans, they do impact my credit score, but not enough to stop me from buying a house. Now, so that's all I kind of want to talk about there. And so a lot of people argue that $20,000 is not enough. It's not, but it helps. It will help many people. And even though the absolute value of 20 grand is not a lot, if this completely wipes your debt, some people they're not comfortable having debt. They don't like owing an entity. And so for a lot of people's mental health, it has been an improvement. Some people do not do well looking at a stack of debt owned. Quite personally, when I borrowed as a student, and I'll tell you why, even though I had fellowships, I saw my student loan debt as good debt, debt that I leveraged to get my education, get out of poverty, and set myself up for stability later on. And so I'm quite comfortable with my student loan debt. And for those of you that are not comfortable with your student loan debt, you're going to pay it back. If you didn't apply, if you weren't eligible for this debt relief, you're going to pay it back. And you can just consider that a portion of your income every month that is repaying for some decisions that you made to be able to live the lifestyle that you're leading today. I think it's a worthy investment. And hey, I'm not too pressed about paying back a student loan. Now, nearly all the Pell Grant recipients came from families with incomes of $60,000 or less. All right. And this is based on distributions within or between 2019 and 2020. All right. So it's saying here that 66% of families, their earned income was 30 grand or less, and about a third of those was between 30 and 60 grand. So I'd say bravo to the Biden-Harris administration. I think they did a great job. All right. And I've seen people from all demographics that I've talked to that have benefited from this, and that makes me happy. That's equity and justice. All right, that's all I want to say about this. All right. They do talk about racial equity here, and I'm going to talk about it as well. They are positing that Black students are more likely to have to borrow for school and take out larger loans, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Let's go back to the slides. Now, let's discuss something that may not be on the forefront of people's minds, and that's the single penalty. Okay, so we just talked about how the debt relief was made available to single filers with an income cap of $125,000 and married filers with an income cap of $250,000. $250,000. Now, assuming that, a married couple doesn't have children, I can see how expenses for the household can get pretty steep. But I'd also say this really sucks for those of us that are single. And I want to explain this for those of you that really don't file taxes, or, you have your taxes filed by someone else. We want to compare here, and I want to make this bigger. So in just a second, you'll see that this is 35% and this is 37%, but let's just make it bigger for the time being. This is the tax rate table for 2022, meaning when we get ready to file our taxes by April of 2023, these are the tax rates that are going to apply. Now, let's take an example. Let's say you make, as a single person, $100,000. That's your taxable income for 2022. Now, the way your tax rate is applied, the first $10,275 of that 100K will be taxed at a rate of 10%. All right. Then the amount between 10,276 and 41,775 will be taxed at a rate of 12%, and so forth. And so the amount of your income between 41,776 and 89,075 will be taxed at a rate of 22%. So the difference between these two numbers will be taxed at a rate of 22%, and so forth. And for 100K, the difference between 100K and 89,076, which is about 11 grand, will be taxed at a rate of 64%. And if you calculate that, the effective tax rate is probably like around 20%. Forgive me, you can do I can put the breakdown of this tax calculation in the chat afterwards. But essentially, it's a staggered payment. And so if you look at this, and so we're talking about a $100,000 salary. So at the end of your tax bracket, you have been charged up to 24% of your income to taxes, to federal taxes. All right, so let's just say you're paying $20,000. Now let's look at a household that has a taxable income of $100,000, and let's see what they have to pay. Now, up to 20K, from 0 to 20K is taxed at a rate of 10%. From 20K to 83K, 550, it's taxed at a rate of 12%. All right, so we're already starting to see the discrepancy here, where a greater proportion of their income has a lower tax rate. Okay. And so finally, from 83,551 to 100K, they will be taxed at a rate of 24%. So their final tax rate is 22%, whereas if it's a single person, their final tax rate for the last part of their income that's in that bracket is 24%. I will break down both of those scenarios in the description box a little bit later after the live stream. And so what ends up happening is year over year, a married couple pays a lot less in taxes over time. You know, if you invest the money that you would have saved, you know, by getting married, you know, that difference is quite a bit cumulatively. So even though a married household has different expenses, they're penalized a little bit less than a single person. So when it comes to the student debt relief, I will say I'm a little bit disappointed. And I'm always disappointed in this single penalty because just because your lifestyle and the choice of whether to partner or not factors into how much money you have to pay to the federal government or how much you have to pay back in terms of student loans. Okay. Now, I want to talk about borrowing for school. And there's a bit of a misconception about how expensive it is to study, especially in 2022. Because the cost of school and incomes have not kept up with inflation, it is more expensive to go to school today than it was for people 10, 20, and 30 years ago. And so I saw a lot of complaints online about people having to actually pay. Are they, I saw someone post the question, will I get my money back for my loans that I had to pay, whereas people today don't have to? Well, no, that's not fair, because the people that are in school now are suffering quite a bit of an inflation penalty. Things that are unaccounted for when people are going to school that increase people's needs for money and worsens this borrowing inequity is the quality of housing and how much money it takes to actually live in quality housing these days when you're going to school, which ups your cost of living. Food quality. So I will say, although fast food is super convenient, the cost of fast food is going up. And if you want to eat quality food, the cost of that is pretty high as well, unless you're going to a farmer's market, unless you're growing your own food locally, or you're participating in a co-op. We also have to take into account that when you're a student, sometimes you are paying for entertainment. You're paying for tickets to events put on by your student groups. Although most of them are free, sometimes there are costs associated with being involved on campus. And if you want a life outside of campus, you may end up paying a few dollars here and there. And now remember, if your take home is only about $1,000 a month, if you're spending $100 on entertainment a month, that's 10% of your take home income, which is a lot. Necessities. So cotton pads, feminine hygiene products, your soaps, all of that has the price tag on those things are increasing these days. The price of all goods and services is increasing. So I think it's okay that, current borrowers are getting this relief because the economy is simply getting out of hand. Now, I want to preface the conversation that we're going to have in just a second with this tweet. I love Twitter. So Tony Wei-Ling says, how wild the University of California, one of the biggest employers and landlords in the state, plays such a major role in setting rent and wages throughout the state. And there's more words that I won't talk about. So this person on Twitter is talking about the fact that the university system isn't really active in helping to set wage control, or I'm sorry, housing cost control. Honestly, the cost of off-campus housing is being driven by market dynamics, which I don't agree with. Now, this person is quote tweeting this Make It article, but I went and dug through and got the original data that supports this. But let's just go ahead and look at the breakdown of the regions. The light green is the median annual income for millennial renters. All right. Millennial, I think they're defining here from 24 to 45 years of age right now. 36. So if we look at the Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim area, so the western part of the South Coast Basin, they're comparing that in the black to the annual income needed to rent a one-bedroom. So I went and looked at the calculation for how they're determining what the income is for a one-bedroom. And this is the income associated with only spending a maximum of 30% of your income on housing. Okay. So in order to only spend 30% of your income on housing, your monthly income, you need to make 72 grand. But most people are only making 36 grand. Now in the Bay Area, it's a little bit worse. You need to be making $100,400 in San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward to be able to comfortably afford a one-bedroom. And that's at 30% of your income. But the median income is 62 grand. I'm going to point out more of the areas that have a UC school. So San Diego, so that would cover UC San Diego. You need 69,000, but the median income is only 41K. Now, these are people that are in the workforce, okay? So we're not even talking about students who are in the workforce, but their pay is significantly stifled. You're not taking home your full potential of income. So the Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario area, which is has some of the lowest cost of living, you still don't make enough at the median. If you're making the median, which is 31,000, it's still not enough to comfortably have your income or comfortably contribute about only maximum 30% of your income to housing. So why is 30% so important? Well, I've talked about this in my relocation video, episode 2 of Under the Hood. The other parts, well, you need money for other stuff. You need money for healthcare, for transportation, for food, for expendables, and you also need income for leisure and entertainment. We're not robots. We also need to save quite a bit because we know that pensions are not as great as they used to be. We know that the stock market is pretty volatile, which is eating into our 401k. So some people, depend on or prefer to put quite a bit of their income. They put the maximum amount allowable into different investment vehicles. So if you don't have enough money to cover your basic expenses, you may not be able to max out your different investment vehicles. So year over year, when I am calculating my cost of living, housing is always the most expensive. And so I always seek to minimize housing costs. Because even if I'm living far away from my job, transportation costs pale in comparison to housing costs. So I get the biggest benefit in my budget by reducing housing costs. So it's super important, which is why I moved away from my job. Now, obviously, so we're in a housing crisis. We all know about the housing crisis, especially in the Bay Area. We know about the protests in People's Park, where locals are protesting the building of a student housing complex because it will tear down a historic grassroots organized park that currently is the housing place for tented people. And so housing tensions are high right now. A lot of Berkeley professors are renting because we simply don't make enough money to save up enough to put a down payment on a house in Berkeley because housing prices have exploded. And this is especially so for a first generation potential housing homeowner that is also single. So let's take a look at this graphic from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. We're going to go to the website and look at this graphic in more detail. So the graphic is showing how much money is needed to meet the housing wage. What is a housing wage? So the housing wage is the estimated full-time hourly wage that workers must earn to afford a decent rental home at HUD's fair market rent while spending no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So this is the per hour amount you should be taking home if you want to meet this 30% threshold. So let's go over to the website. I will link this website in the description box at the end. So this is so the light blue is below $17, right? So that's largely the Dakotas, the Midwest states, and parts of the South, and also parts of the Ohio River Valley area. So housing is fairly affordable for a one bedroom, at least relative to the Western US. Now let's look at the housing wage or the amount per hour you need to make in order to be able to afford housing in California as a statewide median. You need about $39 an hour. And it's saying you need to work 104 hours a week to afford the 2-bedroom rental rate or the 2-bedroom rental home. Okay. So I don't know. I don't think people are working 104 hours a week. Mainly, I don't think that's a very comfortable living. And do we even have the minimum wage laws set up to be able to make $39 an hour for a housing wage to rent a 2-bedroom apartment or rental home? I don't think so. Let's look at California's minimum wage. Okay. This is what I pulled up on the Department of Industrial Relations website for California. It says the current minimum wage in California is $15 an hour for employers with 26 or more employees, or $14 an hour for employers with 25 or less employees. So you can do the math and you can see that, $15 is less than $39, which is needed to comfortably afford a $39 housing wage. So 2 bedrooms are just out. They're just out for most of us. In order to be able to really afford this, you're either skimping on your entertainment, you're skimping on your savings, you're eating low quality food, perhaps, just to make ends meet for housing. If you're listening to this and you want to put a comment in the chat about where the bulk of your money is going and what you have to give up in order to make ends meet and live and perhaps live and be a student in California, please let me know. I do my best to advocate for students in spaces where we're talking about the cost of living for students, hiring students, giving them additional stipends when needed. And we'll talk about that coming up. All right. So how on earth are students surviving, or how are California students surviving? I don't know. I think they are sacrificing quite a high portion of their quality of life just to go to school. But when you know it's a temporary situation, you're likely to be able to get through it. But a permanent housing situation, I don't think anyone should consider this. So I'm pulling the data for the graduate student researcher salary scales for the University of California. This is online. You can see it for yourself. So table 22 is the schedule for graduate student researchers, meaning you're paid to do research, you get a fee reduction, and largely most of your expenses are paid. And people may think that it's enough money for a decent cost of living or a decent quality of life. It's not always enough. In fact, it's hardly ever enough unless you're making some serious sacrifices, right? So in all transparency, most engineering students at my institution are at step 4. We hire them at step 4, which translates to an annual income of $55,163, a monthly income. Actually, let's go over here because this is the 2020 rates, and we're going to go based on the 2021 rates. So the good thing about the University of California is they implement a COA, a cost of living adjustment, to the salary scales quite regularly because, they understand that inflation is happening. So the rate as of October 2021 is $56,818, which translates to a monthly rate of $47,433. $34, and an hourly wage of $27.21. Okay, you say, oh, okay, $27 an hour. That's about what we need for, not really. All right, especially if the one bedroom rate is probably around $30. And so they're close, you may say. However, the way we pay graduate students is a little bit different. They don't take home this at an annual rate. We actually pay graduate students at 50% effort between September and April. So the academic year begins in the middle of the year. All right. So from September, October, November, December, all the way through April, students are paid at 50% effort because they are technically studying. They're in school. So we can't pay them full time for reasons that I really haven't researched. I think it has to do with labor laws. So students are considered part-time for about 9 months out of the year. And then they get their full effort in the summer. That translates actually to about $36K per year. So the salary tables may be a little bit misleading. And the only thing that we really borrow from this chart is the monthly rate. So we budget for the student based on the monthly rate, and then we apply the effort percentages. So if you translate 36K to an 40-hour work week, let's say a student is working 50 weeks a year at 40 hours a week, that translates to about $18 an hour. Okay? If you consider 50 working weeks in a year, because a couple weeks are holidays. So $18 an hour isn't much, and we know that that's way less than what's needed for a housing wage for a 2-bedroom. So parents, so people that are parents and also going to school often need to support multiple people, and $18 an hour is not enough. So this is a situation where if someone desperately needs better quality housing, they're going to borrow. They're going to borrow, or they're going to seek other alternatives that I'll talk about in just a second. Now, why else would anybody be borrowing? Okay. Quality of life, food, necessities that you need to survive. If you don't have family support, if you don't have a savings account that was put away for you for when you needed to go to college, you're going to oftentimes need to borrow to cover those other costs of living just so you can have a good quality of life, because you don't want to be a starving student. There are food pantries available, but I feel like, no one should have to go hungry when they're in school. Let's talk about why savings may not be available for everyone in America, right? To rely on when they go to school. You guessed it, it's the generational wealth gaps. I'm showing you the preview of a graphic from the Brookings Institution. So let's go over to that website. Now, I don't want to paint broad strokes about generational wealth gaps, but we know they exist. Let's get into it. A close examination of wealth in the U.S., and this is an article circa February 2020. It finds evidence of staggering racial disparities. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. At $171,000, the net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family. which they are citing here as a net worth of $17,150 in 2016. Gaps in wealth between Black and white households reveal the effects of accumulated inequality and discrimination, as well as differences in power and opportunity that can be traced back to this nation's inception. So this is true. It's largely true. At a time where Americans were recovering from the Great Depression, there was quite a bit of investment in property or programs to help people become homeowners, and this was largely a benefit that was it was largely white families that benefited from this. All right, so this article is talking about how Black Americans actually were on the right track to start to build wealth for themselves at the end of chattel slavery in the United States. But there's quite a bit of impeding on these efforts, at least back in the day, around 100 years ago. We know about the Tulsa Greenwood massacre, all right, where a thriving Black community was decimated. Okay. The losses amounted to about $3 million in 1874. And we can imagine how much, or we can calculate how much that is worth today. So I'm not saying that every attempt by Black people en masse to gain wealth as a result of institutional inequalities, I'm not saying that those attempts have been futile, because a percentage of Black people have surpassed poverty, and the net worth is, above the median for a few families, like quite a few families. But just looking at median, we know that this is not true for everyone. So if we take a look at the graphic that I previewed in the slides, this is the median net worth by race ethnicity from 1989 to 2016. Okay. And we can see here that if the median net worth, and so net worth is the value of your assets and cash minus your debts and loans and things like that. That is your net worth. It's showing here that Black and Hispanic net worths are lagging behind at around 20% over time, as opposed, oh, sorry, that's not 20%. That is thousands of $2016. So the net worth is around $20,000 for Black and Hispanic families. That's the median. Just in comparison, that of white families is somewhere between 120K and 200K. Everyone, it seems, took a hit during the Great Recession in 2009. This was not a great time for most Americans. And it looks like everyone is rebounding, but at different rates. Okay. Now, let's talk about why these wealth gaps may persist. And just as a note before we move on, if there are not assets in a family, or there's a tremendous amount of debt, saving for college is almost impossible. Okay, we talked about some of the structural barriers in regard to being shut out of housing investment opportunities after the Great Depression back in the 1930s. Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, the undervaluing of homes owned by Black and brown non-white people that also contributes to a lack of net worth. And we know the statistics about non-white people being paid less than their white counterparts. That all contributes to having less expendable income at the end of the month, therefore less money available for savings. So those are the structural issues related to why we may have to borrow. But it wouldn't be a genuine conversation if I didn't talk about cultural spending habits. And so we'll end the live stream talking about this. Financial education. So I'm going to speak from the Black perspective because I'm Black. The financial education that most of us receive, not all, okay? And that's changing because of social media, and we millennials are getting more interested in building generational wealth, changing spending habits, investing more, etc. So we are investing more in financial education now more than ever. However, as a millennial who grew up not in poverty, but on the lower end of the middle class, I wasn't necessarily explicitly taught about. My dad would, when he had the time, I sat and watched him do taxes. He established like a bank account for me. I think I had a credit score before I graduated. But I still, had personal spending habits and views about finances that were not what I have today, right? When I was a burgeoning adult, I wasn't thinking about saving now for a rainy day. I just wasn't. I didn't understand the impact or the economic impact of my spending habits and how that was related to like cultural identity and historic disenfranchisement of Black people. Otherwise, I probably would have done things a little bit differently. So I saw my parents doing it, but it wasn't a cultural thing to me to think about money and how to maximize my spending and saving and things like that. Not only that, most of us as Black people are impacted by the conspicuous spending culture that has changed forms over the years. So in popular music, so in hip hop, conspicuous spending is pretty prevalent in the music. And so although you may think that you're not impacted by this, quite a few of us who received images of conspicuous spending thought that that was, the way to go. Now, this is being even more widespread. Conspicuous spending is even more widespread on social media, in the luxury trends, the luxury tags online, where you're looking at people who are fresh into the workforce, living in luxury apartments, taking luxury vacations, but likely behind the scenes, they're not telling you either they're getting paid by a brand to go and do that stuff, or they're living off their credit. Because there's no way that someone that is at the median of these numbers that I'm showing you here today, there's no way that they should be able to afford a G-Wagon and go to Fiji once a month. That is extremely expensive. And if people aren't careful, or if young adults aren't careful and they don't have financial education, they'll get caught up in these conspicuous spending habits because of peer pressure and keeping up with the Joneses. Now, we all know that income hasn't caught up with inflation of goods and services. And so therefore, there's not a whole lot of expendable income left over. Therefore, you're not going to be likely to put that away for college, just period. people barely have enough money for healthcare. And so if you are a first generation person who is supporting their family and someone in your family is sick, you can forget about expendable income. You're working multiple jobs just to give it all to the head of household to support the family. Now, the last bullet here is about reinvestment, and that relates to the graphic on the right. How dollars circulate in Black communities. I'm specifically talking about spending habits of the Black Americans. So another reason why the rates are so low for generational wealth and net worth for Black people is that there is little reinvestment in the Black community. So let's take a look at that article. Okay. Let's talk about this article very quickly. This is from Greenwood Bank, which is an effort to reestablish economic autonomy in the form of banking for the Black American community. Let's read a little bit what they're saying here. This is an article dated January 25th, 2021. How dollars circulate in the Black community. As we enter 2021, now is the time to increase network of Black communities. I think the time is now, 50 years ago. Though Black communities are increasing their income, the wealth of these communities remains stagnant. In this article, we'll explain the importance of supporting Black businesses to raise the level of money circulation within the Black community. So it's true. There's something called spending creep, or the creep of your quality of life. You may end up making $250K as a first generation person, Black person, but then your spending also creeps up. Therefore, your net worth never increases. Because remember, assets minus debts. So you may go and acquire a debt that requires you to make a monthly payment that eats into quite a bit of your expendable income. And therefore, those debts are going to completely cancel out that nice cushy income that you have been able to acquire. So Greenwood is identifying a circulation issue in the Black community. Let's talk about it. Money circulation is the currency that is physically used to conduct transactions between consumers and businesses, plus money that is stored in banking institutions. Money circulation is critical to a community's potential for economic mobility. More money in circulation means higher financial stability and potential for economic growth. Absolutely. Now, this is the scary fact. A study led by Select Center for Economic Growth found that money circulates one time in the African American community. And why could that be? Well, most likely it's the fact that goods and services are found outside of the Black community. So the goods are being produced by other cultures, other race ethnicities, and services provided where we are getting those from people of other cultural identities. Money circulates 6 times in the Latino community, 9 times in the Asian community. In white neighborhoods, money circulates nearly an unlimited number of times, and you can correlate circulation to the availability of goods and services provided by somebody in your cultural identity. In part, this explains the wealth gap for Black communities. So, yeah, so if you can't, so as a community, you're more likely to invest where you live if you have the money, and if you're making the money and keeping the money. So let's go and talk about what they're talking about for Black businesses. To have higher money circulation, Black communities need to reinvest their money into Black businesses. Like we just said, there needs to be a greater effort to purchase from Black-owned retailers. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And also starting their own business. So owning a business does help with your net worth because you can write off business expenses to your taxes. The business can earn profits, and like I said, people are more likely to invest their profits into helping build up their community. We see this over 10 times over in the Asian community, the white community, where community investments are like a pretty high priority. So there are things collectively that Black people can do to increase their net worth and to engage in community wealth building. And that's providing the goods and services we need to our community, right? Because once those profits are there, we're more likely to reinvest that into the community and set up scholarship funds for our students, right? And if you're earning your own, if you run your own business, you can pay people more than the minimum wage because you know how expensive it is to live, right? So not only do we need structural protections and debt relief like that which was passed down from the Biden-Harris administration, there are also things collectively and individually we need to do, increasing our financial education, reducing conspicuous spending, investing in businesses in your community, making sure that our discretionary income is put towards savings and saving for college. So these are all cultural and collective habits. This has nothing to do with the structural support of the government, although we are owed reparations. Now, last but not least, some tips on actually financing your education in the event that, student debt relief doesn't get canceled ever again. Be prepared to live frugally. Okay. So this is not the time for conspicuous spending, not during school. And if you have a solid plan, look, I'm going to spend 4 to 5 years in undergrad, and I'm going to bust my tail, get a high GPA, and I'm going to get a position as a high paid consultant, then the reward is good. And you can just bite the bullet for a while and suffer through the really low income as a student. And I'm largely talking about graduates. Well, okay. Undergrads, for undergraduates, it's really hard to work full time at a rate that you can cover your educational expenses. So unless you have a merit-based scholarship, likely you'll have to take out student loans if work is too much, right? And that's if you don't have family support. So supplemental loans, like I said, you can supplement any part-time job you have, any fellowships you have to cover the additional cost of living expenses if your mental health is suffering. If the quality of living is making you sick, you may need to borrow a little bit and bet on yourself so that you can have a better college experience. Obviously, family support. Your parents, grandparents may gift you your tuition, which is always a blessing. Additional jobs. All right. So let's say you're an undergraduate student that has a full ride. You may work a little bit on the side as a student aid, as a tutor, to earn money for your leisure spending and for higher quality food or higher quality housing. Work study. So work study is need-based, and it's where you can work on campus toward your student debt. And last but not least, you can really, bust your tail in high school to get a high GPA, along with handling your extracurricular activities and be a high achiever so that you can get your education fully funded. So somewhere or another, you're going to either pay now or pay later. So you're either going to pay now by studying hard, getting a high GPA, and getting a full ride, or you'll pay later where, You kind of take it easy during school, borrow money for your comfort, and then you'll pay later when you have a higher paying job. So you're either going to pay with your effort up front or pay with your money a little bit later in life. And I really feel for people that aren't able to do either, and that's okay. Your journey is specific to your life. And so really that's all I have to say on the student debt relief actions, which once again, thank you to the Biden-Harris administration for doing that. I think that's really helpful for current and past borrowers. But also we need to keep this in perspective in regard to financial education, generational wealth gaps, and really if collectively we need to be saving more for college and we need to be doing less conspicuous spending, but also something has to be done about the high cost of education. Something has to be done about housing costs for students. So there's things that structurally need to happen, collectively need to happen, and individually need to happen. That's all I have to say. If I missed anything significant in this argument, please let me know in the comment section, and I will be linking tons of information in the description box. And with that, have a great week, and I hope your fall semester is going well.